The purpose of this video is to educate the small business owners on why protecting employees' personal identifying information, also known as PII, is necessary, as well as the recommendations for policy and risk management implementation on protecting this information. There are many different approaches and strategies to accomplishing this task, so in this video we will be going over a handful of different options and the importance they each hold. As we begin discussing this topic, the first obligation as a business owner is to contemplate which approach is going to best suit the restaurant and the employees of the restaurant. It is also important to recognize that the entire staff is trusting their place of employment with their personal information, assuming that it will be kept private and secure. Personal identifying information is a term which is used to refer to information that distinguishes an individual's identity, and this can be used by itself or with additional information to connect to a specific individual. The state of New Hampshire considers PII to include, but is not limited to, the individual's name, physical address, email address, social security number, bank account information, credit card information, license or identification number, and telephone number. This also includes a combination of information which can be used to identify an individual. If this information were to be accessed by unauthorized personnel or external individuals, it could have extremely negative consequences for the individuals involved, which may include the employees. The consequences for the individual can include identity theft or blackmail, in addition to a loss in public trust in the business itself. These possibilities alone make it clear enough as to why this topic must be made a priority. It is up to the organization's leadership to take all of the possibilities and factors into consideration. As we discussed throughout this video, there are many different recommendations and aspects to take into account when applying this information to your business. The goal in doing so is to give the leadership a plethora of options which will allow you to choose which is best for your business and its future. The first step that needs to be taken into consideration is understanding what PII the business has for their employees. Questions such as, does the business have access to social security numbers? Do we have two different forms of identification on file, and if so, which ones? Do we have bank account information accessible on our data system? And have we acknowledged the possibility of both internal and external risks which may impact our business negatively? Should be asked and answered. Not only is this information enticing for outside threats, but this information the individuals within the organization should be aware of in order to better protect it. Many incidents are also reported to have taken place from within the organization, and these are as harmful as well. Such incidents can be the result of an employee's mistake, which amplifies the need to ensure those individuals are up to date on valuable data they have access to. Due to the fact that there is such a wide range of possibilities in terms of incidents to prepare for, the business should utilize the all hazards approach. This approach is used to prepare and plan for a wide range of emergencies an organization may face, and it outlines the necessary actions that must be taken in order to prevent further harm or damage. Additionally, these emergencies can be internal or external to the business, which is why this approach is practical. After the business recognizes what personal identifying information they have, there are additional steps that follow. After this information is acknowledged, it is imperative to decide what the next step is and what the business plans to do with this information. This includes whether certain information is needed to be kept, who has the privilege of accessing this information, and if it is now time for the PII to be properly disposed. One way for a business to properly protect the privacy of individuals and their PII is by minimizing the amount of information that is kept. This is also referred to as the minimum necessary principle, where businesses operate with the least amount of needed information to successfully achieve their goals. While doing so, this principle entails that businesses are reassessing the information they currently have and deciding whether or not it is necessary going forward. In addition, it is recommended that once the business reviews and determines that certain information is no longer needed, that it is destroyed properly and necessary steps in doing so take place. Lastly, it is good practice to be operating under the principle of least privilege. This principle will guarantee that those who do not have access to such data for their job responsibilities are not authorized to do so. When this principle is applied to PII, it is important that those who do have access, such as the restaurant's leadership, only have access to the least amount needed to successfully complete their task or duty. This can further protect the business from an internal incident taking place, as well as the individual's information. By By inventory and taking appropriate action with PII, it can better protect the business and eliminate incidents from occurring. Like many other recommendations for policy and risk management, proper training is also crucial for this topic. Ultimately, the assumption must be made that unless individuals receive training or have a background on this material, they are unaware of the vulnerability this information holds. With that being said, introducing individuals, whether they are the co-owner of the business or an employee, to the policies and regulations on this material, it can positively impact the security of it. As mentioned in previous videos, human error or unintended actions are oftentimes one of the largest factors to security breaches or the compromise of information. A specific example of this as it relates to Employees PII is the insider threat which affected approximately 8,000 Coca-Cola employees. This incident was caused by a former employee of the company who stole this information, which went unnoticed for many months. Whether an employee is intending on carrying out malicious actions or not, the company should always be prepared for this possibility. Therefore, it should always be a priority for security purposes to implement training and education on topics such as these. In regard to training and educating, it is also important to take the role of the individual into consideration. The amount of training needed for one person may not be necessary for the other. An example of this would be if the business were to add an additional restaurant location to expand. The training for the general manager of the restaurant will be very different than the training of a new server, as they will each focus on separate priorities and outline different expectations. Unlike other employees, the manager is in charge of many individuals, and that may have the responsibility of handling and securing PII. And with that responsibility, the organization should require specific training before they are given the privilege to do so. As stated before, it cannot be assumed that individuals are beginning their job with a cybersecurity policy background, which means the business's leadership must ensure adequate training is conducted. As the topic of personal identifying information becomes more prevalent in cybersecurity policy, an additional recommendation for protecting this information is the use of data loss prevention. This is a software that aids in preventing a data breach from occurring or from data such as PII from being taken. It will warn the user when they are about to send a file that contains PII, which can prevent mistakes from taking place. Many organizations choose to utilize this system to help keep their data secure while also abiding by regulations. For a business such as a restaurant, this is a simple yet effective way to implement an additional protective measure for leadership who has access to PII. Again, other forms of solutions can involve limiting access to this information or properly disposing of information that is no longer needed. With any rule or policy that is in place within the business, it is also recommended that the expectations and standards for compliance is well established within the organization to include individuals who have access to this information. In a restaurant setting, this may be applicable to leadership, including managers. In the event an individual becomes non-compliant, they should have an understanding of what the consequences and the penalties are. This should be well discussed amongst the leadership in the organization to address the disciplinary actions that will be taken if there is an issue with individuals not complying. This is one recommendation that can be considered for best protecting employees' information. Another valuable recommendation and resource to utilize is the National Institute of Standards and Technology Framework. Although this resource is a government agency framework, it can be utilized by small businesses and organizations as well. This framework has generated a guide specific to the topic of PII, and it is titled Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality of Personally Identifiable Information. With this resource, it outlines educational information on the topic, examples of this data, impact levels, safeguards, and the incident response process for a breach specifically involving PII. This guide can help the business by serving as a place to start and a credible resource to utilize. In addition to the previous recommendations on this topic, it is important to create a cultural emphasis on security in the workplace as well. Such examples of this can include consistent training and dialogue pertaining to this information. This includes the risks and vulnerabilities the business is subject to by handling identifiable information about their employees. These conversations should be more consistent with the leadership compared to the frontline employees, such as the servers. As mentioned earlier, the role of the employee does play a part in their training on policies and topics such as PII. Those in leadership roles should be consistently reminded of the importance and the vulnerability this information holds and how they directly attribute to the protection of it. As discussed in this video, there are many different ways and recommendations for leadership to take into consideration when ensuring protection of their employees' personal identifying information. A small business comes with the added responsibility of educating their leadership on these vulnerabilities and concerns if they do not have the means to employ someone with such knowledge or expertise. With that being said, these recommendations are a good starting point when analyzing the company's security plan. There are many resources for businesses to utilize as discussed, and below this video are a few links to that supplementary information. Every business, whether it is small or large, is successfully operating with the help of its employees, and the protection of those individuals and their information should always be a top priority.